The gunshots echoed across the canyon like thunder. James Mercer dropped the fence post he'd been setting and grabbed his rifle in one fluid motion, eyes scanning the ridge above his property. 3 shots, close together, then shouting. Men's voices, angry and excited. Then a 4th shot, and the sound of horses crashing through brush. Someone was running. Someone was being hunted. And whatever was happening was heading straight toward his ranch. James was 31 years old, a man who'd learned to mind his own business in this brutal corner of Arizona territory. It was August of 1853, the kind of heat that made men crazy and turned the land into a furnace. He'd been working this ranch for 4 years, ever since the Army had given him the land grant for his service in the Mexican War. 200 acres of scrub brush and red dirt that barely supported 20 head of cattle. It wasn't much, but it was his, and he'd survived by following one simple rule: stay out of other people's troubles. The shouting was getting closer now. James could make out words. "She went this way! Cut her off at the creek! Don't let the savage escape!" Soldiers. Cavalry by the sound of it, from Fort Breckenridge, 10 miles east, and they were hunting someone. Hunting a woman, apparently. James felt his jaw tighten. He'd seen what soldiers did to Apache women they captured. He'd been part of campaigns during the war, had witnessed atrocities that still woke him up at night. Things that made him question whether the uniform made men into monsters, or if monsters just found the uniform convenient. The brush exploded at the edge of his property, and a figure burst through, running with the desperate speed of someone who knew death was seconds behind them. James' breath caught in his throat. An Apache woman, young, maybe 25, running full sprint across his land. But it was what she was wearing, or rather what she wasn't wearing, that made his blood run cold. She was completely naked, her body covered in bruises and cuts, her wrists showing raw rope burns, her face swollen on one side like she'd been hit repeatedly. This wasn't a warrior captured in battle. This was someone who'd been prisoner, had been abused, had escaped from hell itself. Their eyes met for a split second. Hers were wild with terror and defiance, the eyes of someone who would rather die than be taken again. James made his decision in that heartbeat. He pointed urgently toward his barn, then held up his hand in a stopping motion. "Hide. Now." The woman hesitated for maybe half a second, years of being taught that white men were enemies warring against the desperate need for any shelter. Then she changed direction and sprinted for the barn. James watched her disappear inside, then turned to face the ridge just as 5 cavalry soldiers crested it, their horses lathered with sweat, their faces red with exertion and rage. The leader, a lieutenant James didn't recognize, reined in his horse hard when he saw James standing in his yard with a rifle. "You there, rancher? You see an Indian woman come through here?" James' face remained completely neutral. He was good at that, at showing nothing. The war had taught him how to lie convincingly when lying meant survival. "Haven't seen anyone, Lieutenant." "Been working on the fence line all morning." The lieutenant's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "She came this direction. We've been tracking her for 3 miles. Savage escaped from the fort this morning, killed a guard on her way out." James felt something cold settle in his stomach. If she'd killed a soldier, they wouldn't just capture her, they'd hang her, or worse. "Like I said, haven't seen anyone. But I'll keep watch. If she shows up, I'll fire 3 shots to signal you." The lieutenant studied James' face for a long moment, clearly not entirely convinced. Behind him, the other 4 soldiers spread out, scanning the property. One of them rode slowly toward the barn. James' heart hammered against his ribs, but he kept his expression calm. The soldier peered through the barn door, then called back, "Nothing in here but hay and some tools, Lieutenant." James silently thanked whatever God was listening that he'd mucked out the stalls yesterday, leaving fresh hay piled everywhere, perfect hiding spots if you were small and desperate. The lieutenant finally nodded. "All right, but keep your eyes open. That savage is dangerous, and we mean to have her back. Dead or alive, makes no difference." He wheeled his horse around, and the soldiers followed, heading south across James' property, still searching. James stood perfectly still until they were out of sight, until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then he walked slowly to the barn, his rifle held loosely, trying to look casual in case they'd left someone watching. Inside the barn, the heat was oppressive, the air thick and still. James closed the door behind him and waited for his eyes to adjust to the dim light. "They're gone," he said quietly. "You can come out." Silence, then a small sound from the hayloft, like someone trying very hard not to breathe too loudly. James looked up and saw her peering down at him from between the bales, her dark eyes filled with distrust and calculation. She'd found a horse blanket and wrapped it around herself, but it did little to hide the extent of her injuries. "I'm not going to hurt you," James said, raising both hands to show they were empty. He'd left the rifle by the door. "And I'm not going to turn you in, but we need to talk because those soldiers will be back, and when they come back, we need a better plan than hiding you in the hay." The woman stared at him for a long moment. Then she spoke, her English accented but clear. "Why you help me? White men don't help Apache women. White men are reason I was prisoner." James felt the weight of that accusation. "You're right. Most white men wouldn't help. But I'm not most men. What happened to you?" The woman's face hardened. "Soldiers raid my village 2 months ago, kill many people, take women and children as prisoners to fort, say we are enemy combatants who need to be relocated. But relocation is not what they do. They keep us in cells, they beat us, they—" She trailed off, but James understood from her expression exactly what they'd done. His hands clenched into fists. "And you escaped," she nodded. "Guard came to my cell last night, drunk, thought he could—" Again she didn't finish, but James got the picture. "I fought back, took his knife, killed him, took his keys, freed myself, ran." James closed his eyes briefly. This was worse than he thought. She hadn't just escaped, she'd killed an American soldier in the process. There would be no mercy if they caught her, no trial, just a rope and a quick drop. "What's your name?" he asked. "Kaya," she said. "Means my older sister. I was named for my mother's sister who died in raid." "I'm James. And Kaya, we have a serious problem. Those soldiers aren't going to stop looking. They'll search every ranch, every farm within 50 miles. When they come back here, and they will come back, they'll search more thoroughly. They'll find you." Kaya climbed down from the loft, moving stiffly, clearly in pain. Up close, the extent of her injuries was even worse. Bruises covered her arms and legs. Her lip was split. One eye was swollen nearly shut. James felt rage building in his chest, the kind of rage that made men do stupid, violent things. "Then I run again," Kaya said simply. "I keep running until they catch me or I die. Either way, I never go back to that fort." James shook his head. "You won't make it 10 miles in this heat with no water, no clothes, no supplies. They have horses, and they know this territory." He took a deep breath, knowing what he was about to suggest would change everything. "There's another way, a way they can't touch you, can't take you back, can't hang you for killing that guard." Kaya's eyes narrowed. "What way?" James met her gaze steadily. "Marry me," the words hung in the air between them like smoke. Kaya stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Marry you? You're a crazy white man." "Maybe," James admitted, "but think about it. If you're my wife, legally married, the army can't take you. You'd be a civilian, protected by territorial law. They'd need a civilian trial to charge you with anything, and no jury in this territory would convict a woman for defending herself against rape." Kaya's expression remained skeptical. "You want to marry Apache woman who killed soldier? You want that trouble for yourself?" "I don't want trouble," James said honestly. "But I can't let them take you back to that fort. I've seen what they do. I was part of it once, during the war, before I understood what we were really doing. I can't—" His voice cracked slightly. "I can't let it happen again, not when I can stop it." Kaya studied his face for a long moment, searching for deception or ulterior motive. "If I marry you, you think you own me? Think you have rights to my body?" James shook his head firmly. "This would be a legal arrangement. Protection only. I have a spare room in the house. Used to be a storage room, but it has a bed. You'd sleep there. I'd sleep in my room. You'd be safe, fed, protected by law. Nothing more." "Until when?" Kaya asked. "Until you're safe," James said. "Until the soldiers stop looking. Until you can go back to your people if you want. Or," he hesitated, "or until you decide you want something different. Your choice. Always your choice." If you're enjoying this story of an impossible decision in the Old West, hit that subscribe button because what happens next will challenge everything you thought you knew about justice and honor. Kaya was quiet for a long time, her dark eyes never leaving James' face. Finally, she spoke. "Why you do this? Really? Truth. James thought about how to answer. Because I'm tired of being ashamed of what I did during the war, ashamed of what my country does to your people, ashamed of men who wear uniforms and think it gives them permission to be monsters. I can't fix all of that. But maybe I can fix this one thing. Maybe I can save one person. Kaya's expression softened slightly. You are a strange white man, James. I've been told that, he said with a slight smile. So, what do you say? Will you marry me to save your life? Kaya looked down at the horse blanket wrapped around her battered body, then back at James. If I say yes, if I marry you, I need 2 things. Name them, James said. First, I need to bury guard I killed. Apache way. His spirit cannot rest until proper burial. Even though he was bad man, his spirit deserves peace. James blinked, surprised by this request. She'd killed the man, escaped from hell because of him, and her first concern was his proper burial. That's honorable. We can arrange that. What's the second thing? I need you to help me find my sister, Kaya said, her voice cracking for the first time. She was taken same time as me. She is only 14, still at fort, still prisoner. I cannot leave her there. James felt the weight of what she was asking settle on his shoulders. Helping her was one thing. Actively working to free other prisoners from a military fort was something else entirely. That was treason. That could get him hanged. But looking at Kaya's desperate, hopeful face, he knew he couldn't refuse. I'll help you, he promised. I don't know how yet, but I'll help you get your sister back. Kaya nodded slowly. Then yes, I marry you, not because I want husband, because I need protection and because you are only white man I ever meet who sees me as person, not as animal or object. They stood in the barn, the heat oppressive, the situation impossible, and James realized he'd just agreed to marry an Apache woman he'd met 20 minutes ago, hide her from the army, and help her break her sister out of a military prison. It was the craziest thing he'd ever done. It was also the rightest. We need to do this quickly, James said, his mind already racing ahead. We need a witness, someone official. The closest justice of the peace is in Tucson, 30 miles south. But we can't take you there looking like... He gestured to her injuries and the horse blanket. We need to get you cleaned up, into proper clothes, make you look like someone who's choosing this freely, not someone running for her life. Kaya nodded. I understand. Make me look like white woman so they don't ask questions. Can you ride a horse? James asked. Apache learned to ride before we learned to walk, Kaya said with a hint of pride in her voice. Good. We'll leave at sunset when it's cooler. I have some clothes that belonged to my mother. She died 5 years ago, but I kept her things. They might fit you. We'll clean you up, bandage the worst of the injuries. Say you had a riding accident if anyone asks. James paused. But first, you should rest. You're hurt and exhausted. The soldiers won't come back today. They'll search the surrounding area first. We have a few hours. Kaya's body sagged slightly, as if giving herself permission to feel the exhaustion she'd been fighting. Where I sleep? James led her to the house, constantly scanning the horizon for any sign of soldiers. His home was small but well built, 2 rooms plus a kitchen. He showed Kaya to the storage room, which he'd been using for equipment and supplies. I'll clear this out. Bring in the spare bed from the loft. You can rest here. While Kaya waited, wrapped in the horse blanket, James worked quickly to transform the storage room into something resembling a bedroom. He brought in the bed, some blankets, even found an old mirror to hang on the wall. It wasn't much, but it was private and safe. When he was finished, he left Kaya alone and went to heat water for washing. He couldn't stop thinking about what he'd just committed to. Marriage, to an Apache woman, an escaped prisoner who'd killed a soldier. He was harboring a fugitive, planning to help her commit another crime by freeing her sister. Any one of those things could get him arrested or killed. All of them together made him either the bravest or stupidest man in the territory. He didn't know which. He carried the hot water and clean cloths to the storage room door and knocked softly. Water for washing. I'll leave it out here. And I found some of my mother's clothes. They should fit. From inside, Kaya's voice came softly. Thank you. James went to his own room and sat on the bed, his hands shaking slightly now that the immediate crisis had passed. What the hell was he doing? He barely knew this woman. Didn't know if her story was true, didn't know if she was dangerous, didn't know anything except that she was hurt and hunted, and he couldn't turn away. His father would have called him a fool. His fellow soldiers from the war would have called him a traitor. But James had stopped caring what those men thought the day he'd watched them burn an Apache village and laugh about it. 2 hours later, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Kaya emerged from the storage room transformed. She wore a simple cotton dress that had belonged to James' mother, pale blue and modest. She'd washed and braided her long black hair. The worst of the bruises were covered by the dress's long sleeves, and she'd done something to minimize the swelling on her face. She looked like a young woman who might be going to town to marry her sweetheart, not an escaped prisoner running for her life. "Will I pass?" she asked, her voice uncertain. James stood up, genuinely surprised by the transformation. "You'll pass. You look," he searched for the right word, "respectable." Kaya smiled slightly, though it made her split lip crack and bleed a little. Respectable Apache woman. White people will not know what to think. They prepared for the journey carefully. James saddled 2 horses, packed water and food, made sure his rifle was loaded in case of trouble. As they were about to leave, Kaya stopped him. "James, if soldiers catch us, if they find out who I am, you must say I forced you. Say I had knife, made you help me. Don't let them hang you for helping me." James looked at her seriously. "If soldiers catch us, I'll tell them the truth, that I'm helping you because it's the right thing to do, and I'll face whatever consequences come." "That is stupid," Kaya said. "That is brave and stupid." "Maybe," James agreed, "but I'm done being a coward." They rode out as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and red, 2 unlikely travelers heading toward an impossible destination. The journey to Tucson took 4 hours, riding through the cooling evening air. They saw no soldiers, passed no other travelers. It was as if the desert had decided to give them this small mercy, this quiet passage toward whatever came next. Tucson was a rough frontier town, more Mexican than American despite the recent territorial changes. The justice of the peace, a man named Miguel Sanchez, lived above a general store on the main street. James knocked on his door just after midnight, hoping the man would be willing to perform a late-night ceremony. Sanchez opened the door in his nightshirt, holding a candle, his expression irritated. "This better be important, senor." "We need to get married," James said. "Tonight, now. It's urgent." Sanchez looked at James, then at Kaya, his experienced eyes taking in the 2 new dress, the barely concealed injuries, the nervous way she stood. "She in trouble? She's about to be my wife," James said firmly. "That's all that matters." Sanchez studied them both for a long moment, then sighed. "Come in, but this will cost you double the normal fee for the inconvenience of midnight weddings." The ceremony was brief, perfunctory, and completely legal. Sanchez asked the required questions, filled out the required papers, had them both sign the marriage certificate. He asked no questions about Kaya's background, about the urgency, about the strange circumstances. Men on the frontier learned not to ask too many questions. When it was done, Sanchez handed James the marriage certificate. "This is legal document, recognized by territorial government and United States law. Your wife is now civilian with all rights and protections of law. Whatever trouble she was in, this probably fixes it." He looked at Kaya directly. "You are now Mrs. James Mercer. Anyone tries to take you anywhere against your will, you show them this paper. You understand?" Kaya nodded, her eyes bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. "I understand. Thank you." They rode back to the ranch as the sun rose, husband and wife on paper, strangers in reality, bound together by circumstance and desperation. When they arrived home, exhausted and emotionally drained, James showed Kaya back to her room. "You should rest. We'll figure out the next steps tomorrow." Kaya turned to face him before going inside. "James, I know this marriage is not real, is just paper for protection, but I want you to know I am grateful, more than I can say in your language. You saved my life today." "You're welcome," James said. "Now get some sleep. We both need it." He went to his own room and lay down, still fully dressed, his mind spinning. He was married to an Apache woman, a woman he barely knew, who'd killed a soldier, who needed his help to break her sister out of military custody. His life had just become infinitely more complicated. But somehow, despite the danger and uncertainty, he felt more alive than he had in years. He fell asleep, wondering what tomorrow would bring, and whether he'd survive long enough to find out. The answer came sooner than expected. James woke to the sound of horses and shouting voices. He bolted upright, heart hammering, and ran to the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. At least 30 soldiers surrounded his ranch house, led by a colonel he recognized immediately. Colonel Marcus Benton, commander of Fort Breckenridge, a man known for his brutal efficiency and his hatred of Apache. And he was dismounting at James' front door, his face set in grim determination. James ran to Kaya's room and knocked urgently. "Kaya, soldiers are here. Lots of them. Stay in your room and don't come out no matter what you hear." He heard her moving inside, the sound of something heavy being placed against the door. Good. She was barricading herself in. James took a deep breath, straightened his shirt, and went to open the front door before the soldiers could break it down. Colonel Benton stood on the porch, flanked by 2 lieutenants. Behind them, the 30 soldiers formed a perimeter around the house, rifles ready. "James Mercer?" Benton asked, though he clearly already knew the answer. "That's me," James replied, keeping his voice steady. "What can I do for you, Colonel?" "You can hand over the Apache prisoner you're harboring," Benton said flatly. "We know she's here. We tracked her yesterday, and when we came back to search more thoroughly, one of my men found her footprints leading into your barn. Fresh footprints, barefoot, the right size. She's here, Mercer, and you're going to give her to me. Now." James' mind raced. They knew. Somehow, despite his precautions, they knew. But they didn't know about the marriage yet. That was his only card to play. "I'm not harboring anyone, Colonel. I have a guest in my home, yes, but she's not a prisoner. She's my wife." The words dropped like a bomb. Benton's face went from grim to furious in an instant. "Your wife? You married an Apache savage when?" "Last night," James said, "in Tucson, performed by Justice of the Peace Miguel Sanchez. Completely legal and properly documented." He reached into his pocket slowly, very aware of the 30 rifles pointed in his general direction, and pulled out the marriage certificate. "See for yourself." Benton snatched the paper and read it, his face darkening with every word. When he finished, he crumpled it and threw it at James' feet. "This is fraud. This is you helping a fugitive escape justice. You're both under arrest." "On what charge?" James asked, keeping his voice calm though his heart was racing. "I'm a civilian who married another civilian. What crime have I committed?" "She killed one of my soldiers," Benton roared. "Stabbed him to death with his own knife. That's murder, Mercer, and you're an accomplice after the fact." "A soldier who entered her cell drunk with the intent to rape her," James said coldly. "That's not murder. That's self-defense. And if you want to charge my wife with anything, you'll need to do it in civilian court with a civilian jury. Because she's not military, never was military, and as a married woman has full legal rights and protections under territorial law." Benton's face was purple with rage now. "I don't care about your legal technicalities. That woman is my prisoner and I'm taking her back." "No," James said firmly. "You're not. She's my wife. She's standing on my property. And unless you have a warrant from a civilian judge, you have no authority here." The standoff was broken by an unexpected voice. "He is correct, Colonel." Everyone turned to see a man stepping out from between 2 of the soldiers. He was older, maybe 60, wearing a suit despite the heat. He carried himself with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "And you are," Benton snapped. "Judge Cornelius Blackwood, Territorial Circuit Court. I happen to be in the area investigating reports of military overreach at Fort Breckenridge." He looked at James. "May I see that marriage certificate?" James retrieved the crumpled paper from the ground and handed it to the judge. Blackwood examined it carefully, then nodded. "This is legitimate. Miguel Sanchez is authorized to perform marriages in this territory. The documentation is proper. This woman is legally Mrs. James Mercer, a civilian with full rights under territorial law." He turned to Benton. "Colonel, you have no jurisdiction here." Benton looked like he was about to explode. "Judge, that woman murdered one of my soldiers." "Allegedly," Blackwood corrected. "And if you wish to pursue charges, you may file them with the territorial court. But you may not seize her without a warrant, and you may not enter this man's home without his permission or probable cause of an ongoing crime. Do I make myself clear?" The colonel's hands were clenched into fists, his whole body rigid with barely controlled fury. "This isn't over," he said to James. "If that savage killed my soldier, she'll hang for it. And if you helped her, you'll hang right beside her." "Then file your charges through proper channels," Judge Blackwood said calmly. "Until then, these civilians are under protection of territorial law. Now I suggest you withdraw your men from this property before I file charges of harassment and illegal seizure against you, Colonel." Benton stared at James for a long, hate-filled moment. Then he turned and barked orders at his men. "Mount up! We're leaving!" The soldiers withdrew, but James could see they'd left 2 men on the ridge overlooking his ranch. They were going to watch him, waiting for a mistake, waiting for an opportunity. When the main force was gone, Judge Blackwood turned to James. "That was either very brave or very stupid, young man, probably both." "Seemed like the right thing to do," James said. "May I speak with your wife?" Blackwood asked. "I'd like to hear her side of this story." James hesitated, then nodded. "Kaya, it's safe to come out now. There's a judge here who wants to talk to you." The storage room door opened slowly and Kaya emerged, still wearing the blue dress, her eyes wary. She'd clearly heard everything through the door. Blackwood studied her face, taking in the barely healed injuries, the defensive way she held herself. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm Judge Blackwood. Would you be willing to tell me what happened at Fort Breckenridge?" Kaya looked at James, who nodded encouragingly. Then she told her story. The raid on her village, the imprisonment, the beatings, the guard who'd come to her cell drunk, the fight, the killing, the escape. She spoke clearly and without emotion, but her hands shook by the time she finished. Judge Blackwood listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Mercer, what you've described are war crimes. If even half of what you've told me is true, Colonel Benton and his men have violated federal law, military law, and basic human decency." He turned to James. "I came here investigating rumors of prisoner abuse at Fort Breckenridge. Several Mexican families had filed complaints about missing relatives, but I had no proof, no witnesses willing to testify. Until now." He looked back at Kaya. "If you're willing to testify in court, to tell this story officially, I can open a formal investigation. It won't be easy. There will be people who won't believe you, who will say you're lying to escape justice. But I'll do everything in my power to ensure you get a fair hearing." Kaya stood silent for a long moment. Then she spoke. "If I testify, if I tell this story in White Man's Court, can you help free my sister? She is still prisoner at Fort, only 14 years old. Every day she stays, there is day she might be hurt, might be—" She couldn't finish. Judge Blackwood's face softened. "I can't make promises, but if your testimony leads to an investigation, if we find evidence of systemic abuse, we can get a court order to inspect the prison and release any civilians being held illegally." He paused. "However, you should know that testifying will make you a target. Colonel Benton will do everything in his power to discredit you, to paint you as a savage and a murderer. Your life will be examined, questioned, attacked. Are you willing to face that?" Kaya lifted her chin, and James saw steel in her eyes. "For my sister, I face anything." The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings that James barely understood. Judge Blackwood moved quickly, filing injunctions to prevent the Army from interfering with Kaya, issuing subpoenas for documents from Fort Breckenridge, and building a case that grew more damning with each piece of evidence uncovered. James and Kaya's marriage, which had started as a legal fiction, became their shield and their prison. They had to maintain the appearance of a real marriage, had to be seen together in town, had to act like a couple. It was awkward and uncomfortable for both of them. But slowly, something shifted. James learned that Kaya had been a healer in her village, skilled with herbs and medicine. When one of his cattle got sick, she treated it with plants she gathered from the desert, saving the animal's life. Kaya learned that James had been a soldier but had left the army in disgust, that he'd seen things that haunted him, that he was trying to build a different kind of life. They started talking, really talking, not just about the case or the soldiers, but about their lives, their hopes, their fears. James told her about losing his parents, about the loneliness of the ranch. Kaya told him about her village, about the life she'd lost, about her fear that she'd never see her people again. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Kaya spoke softly. "James, when this is over, when my sister is safe, I will leave. I will go back to my people. You should know this. This marriage, it is not real. You should not feel obligated to keep me." James was quiet for a moment. What if I want it to be real? Kaya turned to look at him, surprise evident on her face. What? I know this started as protection, James said carefully. I know we were strangers thrown together by circumstance. But these past weeks, getting to know you, learning from you, it's been— He struggled for words. It's been the best part of my life in years. I'm not saying you have to stay. Your choice, always your choice. But I want you to know that if you wanted to stay, if you wanted this to be a real marriage, I'd be honored. Kaya stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You are a strange man, James Mercer. You risk your life for an Apache woman you don't know. You marry her to save her. You let her live in your home, asking nothing in return. You help her fight powerful enemies. And now you say you want her to stay. She shook her head. I don't understand you. I'm not sure I understand myself, James admitted. I just know that before you arrived, my life was empty. I was going through the motions, surviving but not living. You changed that. You gave me purpose, gave me something to fight for beyond just myself. Fighting for me might get you killed, Kaya pointed out. Probably, James agreed. But it would be a good death. Better than dying alone in this ranch, unmourned and forgotten. Kaya reached out and took his hand, the first time she'd touched him voluntarily since the night they met. If we do this, if we make this marriage real, you must know it will never be easy. Your people will hate you for marrying Apache. My people will be suspicious of white man who claims to love one of us. We will always be caught between two worlds, never fully belonging to either. Sounds like my life now, James said with a slight smile. At least this way I wouldn't be alone in it. Kaya smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. You are a good man, James. Strange, but good. I think— She paused, searching for the right words in English. I think maybe I could learn to love you. If you are patient, if you give me time. I've got nothing but time, James said, and patience. They sat together on the porch as darkness fell, hands clasped, two people from different worlds finding unexpected connection in the midst of chaos. The court hearing came on a hot September morning. Judge Blackwood had assembled an impressive amount of evidence. Documents showing unauthorized raids, testimony from Mexican families about missing relatives, financial records proving that prisoners were being sold as laborers. And at the center of it all was Kaya's testimony. She stood in the makeshift courtroom in the same blue dress she'd worn the night James married her, and she told her story. Colonel Benton and his lawyers tried to tear her apart. They called her a liar, a savage, a murderer. They tried to get her to contradict herself, to admit to crimes she hadn't committed. But Kaya stood firm. She answered every question clearly and calmly, never backing down, never wavering. James sat in the front row, his presence a silent support. When the lawyers got too aggressive, when they attacked her character too viciously, Judge Blackwood intervened. This witness is a civilian and will be treated with respect. Continue this behavior and I'll hold you in contempt. The turning point came when Judge Blackwood introduced a surprise witness. A young Mexican woman named Maria, who'd been held at Fort Breckenridge and recently escaped. She corroborated everything Kaya had said, adding her own horrific details. The courtroom fell silent as she spoke, her words painting a picture of systematic abuse and corruption. By the time testimonies concluded, even Colonel Benton's own lawyers looked uncomfortable. Judge Blackwood didn't hesitate. Based on the evidence presented, I'm issuing an immediate order to inspect Fort Breckenridge's prisoner facilities and release any civilians being held without proper charges or due process. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to military authorities for a full investigation into Colonel Benton's conduct. Court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Benton was on his feet, shouting about jurisdiction and military authority. His lawyers were trying to file immediate appeals, but Judge Blackwood was unmoved. The order stood. 3 days later, federal marshals raided Fort Breckenridge. What they found shocked even the most cynical observers. 37 Apache prisoners, mostly women and children, held in conditions that violated every standard of military justice. Among them was Kaya's sister, Naomi, barely recognizable after 2 months of captivity. When Kaya was reunited with her sister, James witnessed something he'd never forget. The two women fell into each other's arms, crying and speaking rapid Apache, holding each other like they'd never let go. Naomi was thin and traumatized, but alive. And now she was free. The scandal that followed destroyed Colonel Benton's career and led to reforms in how the Army handled prisoners. Several officers were court-martialed. The fort's commanding structure was completely reorganized, and all the Apache prisoners were released with formal apologies from the territorial government. It wasn't justice, not really. Nothing could give back what had been taken. But it was something. James and Kaya took Naomi back to their ranch. The girl was terrified at first, didn't trust James despite Kaya's assurances. But slowly, over weeks and months, she began to heal. She learned English. She helped around the ranch. She smiled occasionally, though nightmares still woke her most nights. One evening, about 6 months after the trial, Naomi approached James while he was mending fence. She spoke in careful English. "James, my sister says you want to make marriage real. Not just paper marriage, real marriage with love." James looked at the girl, surprised. "Yes, that's what I want, but only if Kaya wants it too." "She wants it," Naomi said firmly. "But she is afraid you will change, afraid you will become like other white men, afraid she will lose herself if she loves you too much." She paused. "I tell her she is foolish. You are not like other white men. You are different, good different." James felt emotion tighten his throat. "Thank you, Naomi. That means a lot." "Don't thank me," the girl said. "Just keep being good to my sister. Keep being man who hid naked Apache woman from soldiers who would rape and kill her. Keep being man who risked everything for strangers. That is man worth loving." That night, James found Kaya on the porch, staring at the stars. He sat beside her, not speaking, just being present. After a long silence, Kaya spoke. "Naomi says I am foolish for being afraid of loving you." "Are you?" James asked. "Afraid?" "Terrified," Kaya admitted. "When I love something, I lose it. My parents, my village, my freedom. Everything I love gets taken." James took her hand. "I'm not going anywhere, and I'm too stubborn to let anyone take me from you." Kaya laughed, a sound that still surprised him with its warmth. "You are stubborn. Stubborn and strange and good." She turned to face him. "James Mercer, I want this marriage to be real. Not paper protection, real partnership, real love. But you must know I am broken in ways that may never heal. There will be nights I wake up screaming. Days I cannot bear to be touched. Times when I see soldiers and I want to run." "I know," James said, "and I'll be there for all of it. The good days and the hard days. That's what marriage means, right? Being there even when it's difficult." Kaya leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust that meant more than any words. "Then yes, I choose you. I choose this life. I choose us." They sat together under the stars, a rancher and an Apache woman, a marriage that had started as legal fiction becoming something true and beautiful. It wasn't the romance of storybooks. It was better. It was real, built on sacrifice and courage and the choice to see humanity in unexpected places. James and Kaya's marriage lasted 43 years. They never had children of their own, but they raised Naomi as their daughter. She grew into a strong, brilliant woman who became a teacher, educating both Apache and white children in the same classroom, building bridges between communities. Their ranch became a safe haven for Apache people traveling through the territory. Word spread through the tribes about the white man who had sheltered one of their daughters, and they trusted him in ways they trusted few white men. James learned Apache fluently, participated in their ceremonies, became an honorary member of Kaya's original tribe. The local white community never fully accepted their marriage. Some neighbors refused to speak to them, others were openly hostile. But a few, a precious few, saw what James and Kaya had built and respected it. And slowly, grudgingly, attitudes began to shift. When James died at age 74, his funeral was attended by both Apache and white mourners, one of the first truly integrated ceremonies anyone in the territory had ever seen. Kaya spoke at the service, her English now perfect, her voice steady despite her grief. "My husband was not perfect man," she said, "but he was good man. When he found me running from soldiers, naked and terrified, he had choice. Turn away and be safe, or help and risk everything. He chose help. He chose courage. He chose to see Apache woman as human being worth saving. That choice changed my life, changed my sister's life, changed this whole community." She looked out at the assembled mourners, Apache and white sitting together, united in grief. "James showed us that we are not so different, that white man can love Apache woman. that enemies can become family, that courage is not about fighting, but about choosing kindness when hatred would be easier. This is his legacy, not land or money or status, but love that crossed boundaries, and love that made us all a little more human. Kaya lived another 11 years after James died, surrounded by the community they'd built together. When she finally passed, she was buried beside her husband, their graves marked with both Christian and Apache symbols, a final statement that love needed no single tradition, no singular way of being. The story of James Mercer and Kaya became legend in that part of Arizona. The rancher who hid a naked Apache Escapee and ended up married to her. The woman who survived horror and found love with an unlikely ally. The marriage that started as legal protection and became one of the great romances of the frontier. Because that's what they'd done on a hot August day in 1853. James had seen someone in desperate need and hadn't looked away. Kaya had trusted an enemy and found a partner. And together they'd proved that sometimes the most unlikely connections become the strongest bonds. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage are the quiet ones. The decision to help when it's easier to ignore, the choice to trust when every experience teaches distrust, the willingness to love across boundaries that society says should never be crossed. James and Kaya's story reminds us that humanity transcends race, culture, and circumstance, that mercy is never wasted, that the families we choose can be just as powerful as the families we're born into, and that sometimes the best things in life come from moments when we choose courage over fear, compassion over hatred, and love over prejudice. Now click on the video on the screen to hear another story of impossible courage in the Old West, where one split-second decision changed the course of an entire community's future.